Hello and welcome to today's session. I'm Sarai Salinger. I'm the Critical and Emerging Tech Lead within the Strategic Initiatives team at Standards Australia. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on 42001, the AI Management System Standard. It is an essential publication within the AI sector, and Harm Ellens is going to be joining us shortly to explain why it's so important and what makes it so relevant. Before we go much further, I'd like to start by acknowledging the land on which we meet today. We are here in Sydney, in the Gadigal, on the land of the Eora Nation from the Gadigal people, and would like to acknowledge the elders, current, future, and emerging. Following today's presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions. Please use the chat function if you need to. There'll also be a Slido code which will be appearing, which you can use for questions, and we will do our best to get to them. It's important to give you a disclaimer that the information we're providing you today are given for educational purposes alone, and this is not to be taken as formal advice. We'd also like to give you some information regarding our distribution partners. So you'll see them listed here on the screen. Our distribution partners are where you can come to purchase the standard, including 42001, any other standards that Harm refers to, and obviously anything else that might be relevant that we refer to today. Before we get started, I'd also like to just let you know about a 2-hour training module that we have developed in partnership with the Australian National University and their School of Cybernetics. This will be a course which will give you a much further in-depth formal training on the standard that we're going to present. You'll also come away with a certificate of completion from the university. So this brings us to the far more interesting part of today's discussion, which is hearing Harm talk about the standard itself. Now, Harm Ellens requires very little introduction. He's Director of AI Advisory Services at Virtual Inc. Australia. He possesses over 2 decades of experience within the AI sector, including specialising in technical, ethical, and business factors of AI. He's the co-chairperson of IEC SC42 Working Group 3 on trustworthiness, and is part of Working Group 4, as well as the co-convener of ASIT 43, which is the Standards Australia Committee on AI. His overarching goal is really to foster responsible, ethical, sustainable, and inclusive AI practices. So with that, over to you, Harm.
Thank you, Araya. Yes, 42,000 and me. I was involved in the drafting of 42,001 pretty much from the beginning, and have contributed in a reviewing or contributing capacity to many of the AI standards that we will be discussing today. In 2019, Standards Australia invited me to join the AI standardization process to provide an industry-centric perspective to the proceedings, as I have been involved, as Soraya mentioned, in the commercial deployment of AI systems since 2004. So I will use 42001 and AI management system and AIMS interchangeably. And we've assumed that you are here because you want to or you have to implement AIMS. And that means that the focus of this session today will be on planning for the implementation of AIMS and the establishment of AIMS. At some future stage, we will probably do another webinar on reviewing and adopting AIMS after it has been in operation for a while. So just be aware that today's session is somewhat biased towards setting up the AI management system for success. So let's go. So officially, it's called ISO IEC AS 42001, and it has been identically adopted in Australia from the global standard. So as Saraya mentioned in her introduction, you can go and get your copy through any of the distribution partners. It is the same as the international standard. Australia has made a very substantial contribution to this standard, and in addition to me and those that you may have seen presented last week, we were supported by a large group of Australian experts from industry, from academia and government, and I would want to take this opportunity to thank them for their support. The standard is based on ISO's so-called Harmonized Management System Standard. More on that in a second, but basically means that those that are familiar with ISO 9001 or ISO 27001, for example, will find much in common. The other aspect of the standard that is worthwhile pointing out is that it is horizontal, which is sort of another word for generic. It's meant to be applicable across all industries, and another way of saying it is that it is neutral to application or industry. It also means that certain industries, like financial services, for example, may create additions to the standard that are specific to their domain. And finally, it is structured so that we can be, or you can be, conformity assessed. You can receive certification to this particular standard. It's expected that that will be possible in Australia from June, July onwards this year. And in some settings, like companies that operate their AI systems in Europe, this conformity assessment will become mandatory for services such as recommended chatbots or facial recognition system, so-called high-risk use cases. As the year progresses, we'll find more and more about that. So let's discuss a little bit the relationship of this standard to other AI standards, because while a great deal of publicity has accompanied 42001, it was not the first standard that was developed by ISO specifically to address concerns relating to AI. The AI management system was developed after 3 other fundamental standards were become available. They will be helpful references for when you start implementing your aims, and I will touch them briefly here. AI management in general and global AI regulation in particular requires active risk management. So one of the major inputs into 42001 provides guidance on risk management. And that standard itself is based on the widely adopted ISO risk management standard 32000. So if you're familiar with risk management as a governance instrument, then this guidance on risk management will help you focus on the AI-specific aspects. We will touch on AI-specific sources of risk a little later in the session, but for now, it's probably enough to know that if you have conducted risk assessments and have been involved with risk management before, then much of the process will be the same. It's the nature of the risks that is different for AI. So what makes an AI system different from other IT systems? Well, that question is answered in part by another foundational standard, 22989. It explains what makes an AI system different from a regular IT system. And I'll read out the definition of that standard so that we're all on the same page. It says, an AI system is an engineered system that generates outputs such as content, forecasts, recommendations, or decisions for a given set of human-defined objectives. Note 1 to entry. The engineered system can use various techniques and approaches related to artificial intelligence to develop a model to represent data, knowledge, processes, etc., which can be used to conduct tasks. And note 2 to entry says AI systems are designed to operate with varying levels of automation. Another important component of that standard 22989 is that it describes various AI roles. Roles can be an AI developer, an AI service provider, an AI user, or an AI consumer. And the role an organization has informs the way that it structures its AI management system. We'll touch on that a little bit later as well. So the AI management system has to be adopted to the AI role of your organization. And it is the role of top management and those responsible for AI guidance to determine for which role the AI management system is implemented. I can't stress that enough because it will actually reduce the amount of work that you'll have to do as you implement the system. By the way, 22989, the standard, is available for free from ISO. You can purchase it if you want, but if you search and Google for it, you will find it on the free downloads section of the ISO website. Now, to help those that are responsible for AI in top management, the C-level executives and the board, 38507 is full of guidance on what can be reasonably expected from decision makers when it comes to proving direction to the use of AI systems in an organization. And then there is one other standard that I'd like to point out here that will become available later this year, and that is the AI impact assessment. When it comes out, we'll probably do a similar webinar on it. You will find that a lot of 42001 makes reference to the AI impact assessment. There is some guidance in 42001. 42005 is a far more comprehensive version of a standard that will help you conduct the impact assessment. So here's a different view of the same information. Risk management deeply informs the AI management system. And being a management system that's based on ISO's harmonized approach to management system standards, if you're familiar, as I said before, with 9001 or 27001, then your learning curve might actually be a lot less steep than you think you would. When you compare these standards, you'll notice that their tables of content are structured similarly. And when you read individual clauses, you may actually notice that some of the text is also identical. And that's because there's actually a standard for creating management standards. So AIMS is new, but management standards are not. And these management standards are not specific to technology either. For example, there's a management standard for environmental management. It's number 14001, EMS for short. Same principles, same structure. So whilst AS, ISO, IEC 42001 is new, you can use it alongside a great deal of supporting content and leverage a lot of existing skills and expertise. Now, those that attended last week's sessions may recall that we skimmed the next couple of slides, but in this session, we'll go deep into the structure of the standard and explore its key concepts. So here are the high-level clauses of AIMS. And as Soraya mentioned in her introduction, if after this session you are interested in an even deeper dive, there will be this QR code on your screen at the end of the session where you can register for the AIMS training that has been developed by ANU's School of Cybernetics. Now, in the next section, I'll quote directly from the standard a couple of times to sort of give you a feel of what to expect from the language, and then I'll unpack it a little bit to make it more easily digestible. So the context, right? The standard says, the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of its AI management system. The general purpose of the AI systems that are developed, provided, or used by the organization shall be considered. The organization shall determine its roles with respect to these AI systems. These roles can include, but are not limited to, one or more of the following: AI providers, including AI platform providers, AI product or service providers; AI producers, including AI developers; AI customers, including AI users; AI partners, including AI systems integrators and data providers; AI subjects, including data subject and other subjects; relevant authorities, including policymakers and regulators. So that's a very, very diverse set of roles that this standard enables organizations to approach their responsible management of AI through. Now, those external issues that were mentioned should take into consideration legal obligations, policies and guidelines issued by regulators, incentives or consequences associated with the purpose of the AI system, culture, tradition, norms, and ethics. And the internal issues relate to the organization's objectives related to AI, and more on that later. The contractual obligations that you might have, and the technical requirements to meet those objectives and to meet those obligations. Other elements of the context include stakeholder expectations and their need and the actual scope of the AI management system. You may, for example, focus initially on a single application or a single system or a single division before you attempt to embrace the entire organization. So there's a lot of consideration that goes into that context. Leadership is about the commitment of top management to establish an AI policy and to set the AI objectives that are compatible with the strategic direction of the organization. The policy and the objectives should put you in a position where you can ask a so what question of the deployment of your system. Is this particular initiative aligned with those objectives? Yes, we have shiny new tools, but do they actually align to the strategic direction of the organization? Now, while you may not be in the room while that AI policy is drafted, the standard requires that this AI policy, and I quote, is appropriate to the purpose of the organization, provides a framework for setting AI objectives, includes a commitment to meet applicable requirements, and includes a commitment to the continual improvement of the AI management system. The reason why we have an AI management system is that it is different. AI is different from traditional systems. The speed with which systems might morph, change, exhibit unexpected behavior is very, very different from traditional systems. And therefore, we need a continued commitment to that continual improvement of the AI management system. It's quite different from other systems that may require less frequent updates and less frequent inspection of the various moving parts. Leadership also requires ensuring that roles and responsibilities, both for the AI management system and the wider use of AI, are well understood and communicated. So obviously, all of this requires a fair amount of planning to address the internal, external issues that we discussed earlier. Other activities that we need to plan for are the previously mentioned AI risk assessment process and the associated risk treatments. We need to assess the potential consequences for individuals and societies through an AI system impact assessment. We need to set objectives. We need to plan to achieve these objectives at all the relevant functions and levels. It's not good enough just to define them at the high level. They need to be propagated throughout the organization. And we need to make change to aims as the need arises. To make all this happen, we need access to resources. We need to ensure these resources have the necessary competence and that they are aware of what's happening and that what's happening is communicated and documented. Now, all of this planning can happen while your AI system has already been made operational or is in the process of being developed. In a way, we and 42001 are playing catch up. AI systems have been out there for a while. Only now are we structuring ourselves to manage those systems in a responsible fashion. So the standard allows it to be applied to existing and new systems alike. The next phase is operational planning and control, performance evaluation and improvement of both aims and the system it manages. Operational planning focuses on ensuring that the management system is set up for success in managing your AI system. I heard a great phrase the other day, measure what you treasure, as an alternative to what gets measured gets managed. Measuring is a small but essential part of performance evaluation and therefore the management system. For those that are seeking to have their aims accredited in the future, it's worthwhile having a deeper look at the internal audit section. Accreditation to 42001 is expected, as I said before, to be possible from June, July this year. Another quote from the standard. Top management shall review the organization's AI management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. So, for those that are familiar with other management standards, it should come as no surprise that continual improvement is the final clause in the main body of 42001. And if you thought that those last couple of points went by quite fast, you're not wrong. They are far more succinct than some of the other clauses, and that's because there is much less AI-specific content to consider in that part of the standard. So in the time that remains, let's have a look at the contents of some of the annexes in AIMS. Interestingly, the annexes actually make up the largest part of the standard. What we're looking here is a representation of Annex C. Annex C covers two things. It covers those objectives that we have mentioned before for managing AI system risks. And importantly, it helps you identify some sources of risk when it comes to identifying them, managing them, and treating them. We'll look at the source of risks on the next slide. So rather than discussing each of these in detail, I'd actually like to provide you with another quote from the introduction to the annex. It says, this annex is not intended to be exhaustive or applicable to every organization. The organization should determine the objectives and risk sources that are relevant to them. ISO IEC 23894 provides more detailed information on these objectives and the risk sources and their relationship to risk management. Evaluation of AI systems initially, regularly, and when warranted, provides evidence for assessing an AI system against organizational objectives. So what we are looking here is a set of topics that you would consider to help the organization define what it wants to achieve by deploying AI. So for some organization, it might be that it wants to be better at safety, have safety systems scan for damage to airplanes. There are many applications of AI that focus on improving safety. But we also have to ensure that these systems are secure. So there's a different set of objectives there. You will notice a couple of objectives here that are not immediately technical. Fairness is a widely discussed topic, and the concept of bias in AI systems is now reasonably well understood. However, assuring that a system is fair and is free from unwanted bias is much less easy achieved without some active intervention. So objectives will be specific to your organization, to the strategic direction that you set for the deployment of the technology, in much the same way that organizations have set objectives for more traditional forms of information technology. And quite possibly the most important part of this set of this category of risks is the organization-specific objectives. It's very, very important that when you look at the content that the standard makes available to you, that inspires you to think about these various topics, it's very, very important that in addition to them, you closely consider what makes your organization unique and what that uniqueness might mean in terms of risks and how to set appropriate objectives to manage them. All the auditors that I've spoken to and that are preparing themselves and their organizations for the certification of 42001 have advised me that they will look for evidence that the organization has spent time contemplating and documenting this particular element. Even in the unlikely event that you arrive at the conclusion that there aren't any organization-specific objectives in relation to the risks, even in the unlikely event that is the case, you still have to document the fact that you went through a process to arrive at that particular conclusion. Now, what you won't find in this annex is a quick AI risk checklist or an AI objective checklist. That's for two reasons. First of all, the roles that we discussed early creates a very, very broad set of possible risks and possible objectives. But secondly, the authors of the standard really wanted to encourage organizations to actively engage with setting objectives, identifying risks, to ensure that they owned the responsibility that they take upon them when they deploy an AI system. So I'm afraid that you actually have to do some of that heavy lifting of determining your organization's objectives and AI risks. So what are the sources of AI risk? So we're still in NXC, but now we're looking at specific sources of risk for AI systems and AI applications. And it's fair to say that due to the wide variety of systems and applications, it's very difficult to make generic statements here, but there are a couple of things that are identical to many of the systems out there. But again, before we do that, pay particular attention to the risks that are specific to your organization's use of AI, that little box in the right bottom corner. So I'm going to pick up a couple of risks that are common across deployments. Facial recognition and other forms of biometric matching might be a medium risk in one context, but high risk in another. So again, it's the standard doesn't make statements with regards to what it considers low, medium, high, unacceptable risk, but it does provide you with pointers to actively document what is specific to your AI system or your AI application. Now, regardless of the AI system or the application, the level of automation will always introduce some level of risk. That risk needs to be assessed, it needs to be managed, and it needs to be treated. You may recall that automation is a key attribute of the AI system definition that ISO uses. So when you go through this particular annex, pay particular attention to the risks that present themselves when we have a degree of automation that is used in the system. Now, of course, while we have spoken until now about AI systems and AI applications as if they were completely separate from traditional systems, this is actually very rarely the case. And you see in the top left-hand corner that complexity of environment. And what that speaks to is that we have to carefully manage the risks associated with the AI capability that is embedded as a system within a system, AI capability that is part of an otherwise traditional software system. You can imagine a series of AI applications that together make up a system. A speech recognition system that provides an input into a route planner, which then visualizes itself onto an augmented reality device. You get these chains of systems, and that complexity of environment is true for nearly all of the systems that incorporate a degree of AI in the real world. And then finally, there are risks associated with assembling systems and applications from components that are procured. In the training session, in the e-learning that we referenced earlier in the presentation, there is a section that discusses the role of particularly Australian organisations and the observation that the majority of Australian organisations are likely to be consumers of AI systems. There is definitely development work going on, particularly in large financial institutions, and on the one hand, and startups on the other. But the expectations are that the majority of Australian organisations will procure rather than develop their own AI applications. And there's a specific set of risks that comes with procuring that application. You may have heard the term black box. The preferred term for that now is opaque box. So opaque box systems make it very, very difficult to get to the bottom of what happens inside them, and therefore you could be exposed to greater risks. So to make sense of all of that and to receive guidance from top management, you need those objectives that we mentioned earlier, and that's the next slide. So this is quite busy. Again, I won't be going through everything that you see here, but I'll quote from the standard again. And this time it's from Annex A. The Annex A is called Reference Control Objectives and Controls, as well from Annex B, which is called Implementation Guidance for AI Controls. Now, before I do that, I should point out that these annexes are normative. And normative in standards speak, if you're unfamiliar with the term, means that they are a mandatory part of the standard, and that an auditor will need proof that each element in these annexes has been considered. So anyway, the Annex A says the controls detailed in Annex A provide the organization with a reference for meeting organizational objectives and addressing risks related to the design and operation of AI systems. Not all the control objectives and controls listed in the annex are required to be used, and the organization can design and implement their own controls. See clause 6.1.3. Annex B provides implementation guidance for all the controls listed in Annex A. The first column in a particular table provides the cross-reference from a specific clause in Annex B. Now, what does that mean? While I gave you in the previous two slides the impression that there was a lot of heavy lifting that you had to do yourself, this particular section has been designed by the authors and the contributors to the standard, that they have created effectively a task list of all of the things that need to be put in place to operate the AI management system. You could consider it as the master to-do list for 42001. And not only have they given you a to-do list, but they've also provided a step-by-step guidance for all the things that you have to consider when you implement the AI management system. It's not quite following the bouncy ball, but it is pretty close. Now, as you can see on the slide, these controls span a wide variety of topics, and you will also notice that they echo many of the topics and themes that we have covered so far. But some of them we haven't, so I thought I'd point them out here. For example, we haven't really spoken much about the AI system lifecycle or the information for interested parties and the relationship with third parties. All of these things on this slide need to come together to enable organizations to use AI responsibly. Exactly what that means in the context of your organization may require you to define your own organization-specific controls. It's that little box tucked away in the right-hand corner that has nothing in it, but it's intentionally left blank. And like we mentioned before, not all of these topics apply to all AI roles. It may come as no surprise that Annex A and Annex B together make up a very, very substantial part of 42001, both in its printed and electronic forms. And yes, you can still buy printed versions of these standards in some countries. Now, all of left now is to touch briefly on where do you start with all of this. And while this slide is not a formal part of the standard, I want to leave you with some ideas on how you might get started. Your organization, especially if it has developed its own AI systems or it has purchased AI applications, is likely to have one or more of these policies already. Use those policies as your starting point. Repurpose them. While AIMS is new, it's capable of incorporating and acknowledging existing artifacts. That way, you can focus on the things that are truly new, or you can review what has come before you in light of these new requirements. It's also worthwhile to look for similar policies in other management systems. We mentioned a couple before. Maybe you can leverage policies developed as part of a 27001 conformity assessment of cybersecurity. Your data for AI policy can be informed by existing privacy policies. Most organizations have a general IT policy, so maybe that can be extended to include AI rather than building another AI use policy. Most of your friendly local procurement specialists can help you develop vendor questionnaires if you need them in order to make sure that you understand what they have done with regards to the responsible deployment and use of AI. I urge you to resist the temptation to Google ISO 42001 policy templates and hit the download button. Experience tells us that a reuse strategy is a very, very effective one. And with that, I'll hand it back to Soraya for Q&A.
Thank you, Harm. That was very, very interesting and a very thorough and in-depth analysis of such a relevant and important standard in the world of AI right now. And just for the audience, please remember that if you'd like to ask any questions, you can do so using the Slido. The code should be on the screen shortly. If not, it is 2217 507. So let's kick this off with a couple quick fire questions. But just to start, what do you think makes 42001 so different from other standards within the AI space?
It is the first internationally recognized standard that has been constructed independent of a particular legal code. I suppose that's the major difference. We have the European AI Act. We have the NIST risk management framework in the United States. So there are plenty of standards that were developed locally, and local can still be very large, but it certainly hasn't got none of the other standards have had the global reach that this particular standard carries with it.
Yeah, great. We've had another question which I'm not sure you'll actually have the answer to, because the standard was only released in December and adopted nationally in Australia, I believe it was February 16th. So it's very new. But someone has asked if we have seen if the banking industry has adopted the standard and implemented it. Equally, have you heard of any industries or sectors which are taking more of a leading approach to implementing the standard?
So there are definitely organisations in Australia, financial organisations, who are working on the implementation. As you may have understood from what I have presented here, it's certainly quite all-encompassing. It requires a lot of data gathering on the part of the organisation that is looking to implement aims. Scoping is a very large part of this. Organisations will try to survey and will survey where systems are being used, and then have to pick what they choose to be their first topic for aims. In the financial services industry, there are definitely organisations that have been working with the draft versions of the standard, and there is one Canadian bank that has actually gone through let's call it a test run of the AIMS certification with the aid of one of the large accounting firms. They went through the entire process. They can't officially be certified yet because the processes to do that are not in place. But this particular Canadian bank, which is a private bank, not a retail bank as we're more familiar with here in Australia, but it was a private bank that went through the entirety of implementing the AIMS draft as it stood in July last year.
It's a really interesting point, actually, because there is two parts to it, right? There is the part of implementation and understanding how do I make this work in the context of the organization, and then there's the certification, and they're two very separate pieces of work. But a lot of business will be very interested in the certification piece because it's considered a bit of a trust mark of good practice. Can you talk a bit more about what certification for 42001 may look like?
Yes, so there are various organisations around the world that are developing courses for those that want to lead AIMS implementations and those that are effectively the hands and feet of those lead implementers. So there's the implementation section. There will be certification available. The one that I'm aware of is from Germany, probably in the next 2 months or so. And so apart from the implementers who will be certified, there will be auditors and lead auditors who will also be certified. And those people will then have the right skill set and expertise to help an organization prepare for the external audit or the certification process, and or conduct the conformity assessment that is the precursor to certification. So lots of different moving parts. It's a bit like the legal system. You have one part that that designs the law. You have another part that sort of enforces the law, and then you have another part that makes sure that that's all recognized and running smoothly. So there are other standards being developed at the moment that make all of that possible.
Yeah, great. And I suppose, kind of jumping off on that, if you look at it from a different perspective, certification aside, but just implementation, what would the risks be for an organisation to not implement an AI management system standard into their organisation, their business practice?
Well, we we can draw some parallels between other similar events from the past. GDPR is a well-known legal requirement for organizations that hit many organizations out of the blue, and it really required them to scramble a set of compliances together in order to be able to continue to operate, particularly in Europe. Fortunately, the European Union has learned from the havoc that caused and has made 42001 one of the standards that can be used to prove that organizations are operating within the confines of the European AI Act. So if you are an organization who has customers in Europe, who potentially even services Australian customers in Europe, then the European AI Act is likely to affect you. And if you are operating what are called high-risk use cases, you will have to show conformity to the Act, and the way to do that is by certifying to 42001.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got some more great questions coming in from the audience. There's another one that says, as the standard is voluntary, what would you see as the top reasons or incentives for any company to implement the standard, particularly SMEs that may not have the funds or the time and resource? It might come across as quite a resource-heavy process to implement this. So what would some of the reasons be why someone would participate in implementing it?
So there are examples in Australia. If you search your favorite news service, you probably will have, and you have an interest in AI, you would have noticed that last year there was a great deal of attention given to facial recognition in retail environments, and understandably, people were very upset and concerned about the fact that these systems were rolled out without proper communication. Certification against this standard would certainly be one step to restoring some of the loss of reputation that caused. So that's one of the reasons why organizations may want to do that. Consumers may start to demand that some of these systems actually are proven to be managed responsibly. And then with regards to the small to medium enterprise, that is a particular area of interest from Europe, where, like here, the vast majority of organizations are actually in that category of being micro, small to medium enterprises. And there's actually a proposal being developed inside SC42 to write a handbook specifically for small to medium enterprises to help them deploy the system, to make sure that people don't overlift themselves, if that's a term, when it comes to implementing the standard.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose anyone that's also a supplier for government or any kind of larger organisations would probably want to be associated with something like this as well, to show that they've got those robust systems in place. Another great question from the audience here. Is the standard equally applicable for those who procure and use AI off the shelf versus those who develop AI? And this is quite good because I think it highlights some of the nuance in what this standard actually does and where it doesn't support AI.
Yes, so the answer to that is yes. It is applicable, but it's, I suppose, not equally applicable, because the roles that a developer performs are different from an organization that procures AI. So the risks in development are very different from the risks in deploying. The objectives for developing are very different from deploying. So you can see how the role that you perform in the AI ecosystem is different, and it basically encourages you to be very, very specific about the risks that you manage, the controls you put in place.
Yeah, and there's a couple questions which have been coming through about roles and responsibilities. So the first one is, could it be used in government departments and agencies, not just the commercial sector? And I think that's interesting because you talked about the horizontal nature of the standard earlier. So maybe dive into that a little bit more.
Well, if you are based in New South Wales, you might be familiar with the New South Wales government framework around responsible use and procurement of AI. And the authors of that particular government mandated responsible AI procurement process have actually contributed to this standard as well. And there are sections that, if you are familiar with that New South Wales code, will look very, very familiar in this standard. What I mentioned before, that Australia has contributed significantly, it was significant. And that's one of the examples of Australian precedent being included in this particular standard. So yes, whilst I am biased towards private enterprise, and I have worked a lot in government. If you have ever needed to contact the ATO and use the Alex chatbot, that is one of the projects that I was involved with in the past. So it is very, very applicable and very, very appropriate to use this in a government context.
Exactly. I think that's really interesting and really really valuable insight there. So we've got another interesting one, which is going to take us on a slightly different path, but I think that in itself is quite curious. How will you stay ahead of advances in AI tech? And are there plans to renew and review and redevelop this standard? So there's, I guess, part one is how it relates to the tech itself, and part two, the review process of standards.
Yes, so I'll answer that that last question first, because that's the standard answer. So standards can be reviewed every 5 years. That's the standard process. They can be updated every 2 years, and they can be amended as we see fit. And at the moment, there's actually an amendment of that 22989 standard that I mentioned in the earlier slides going on as we speak. And that amendment was necessitated by the explosion of generative AI. So there is like an indirect reference to large language model in that standard, but it is nowhere near enough for the amount of attention it rightfully receives at the moment. So in October last year, we kicked off a piece of work to create an amendment to that standard. That standard will provide a set of definitions on what ISO means and how it defines some of this transformer capability. And then it will provide some additional descriptive content. And with those amendments, we can then apply similar amendments to the other standards. So there's not going to be a significant revision of this standard for some time, but it is likely that there will be amendments that account for the fact that this is indeed a very, very fast-moving field.
I think that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Harm, for your time and your ongoing commitment to standards. Your work is appreciated, not just in doing events like this for us, but also, you know, writing the standards, helping with the training course, helping with all the extra activities that you do to support the world of Standards Australia. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. There is a lot of questions we'll review, and if there's an opportunity, we might share some of the answers later. We'll see. I think we all learnt quite a lot about the AI management system standard in a very brief hour whistle-stop tour. So That has been incredibly beneficial. Thank you again, and goodbye. And thank you from Standards Australia.
My pleasure.